Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Clark. We're here at Northwest Sportsman Magazine and nwsportsmanmag.com. Very excited today to be talking to Daniel Garrett from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Daniel, tell us what's happening July 12th through the 16th.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. So this July through 12th through the 16th, we're going to do Bass Week again. I believe this is the fourth year in a row we've done Bass Week, and it's basically a week of promotion and outreach to highlight the bass fishing opportunities around the state of Washington and try to teach a couple of how-to techniques to beginners that might be just getting involved in the sport of bass fishing.
Great stuff. I was looking at the website prior to today, and I noticed on there's a lot of information on top 10 bass lakes in Washington, 5 tips for beginners, bass jargon, Banks Lake, there's a whole thing there. And then there's a bass photo contest, correct? They've got a lot of different prizes. I guess Cabela's is providing a gift card. So it's well thought out and really an exciting opportunity for families, moms, dads, kids, everybody to get out on the water. How much bass fishing opportunity is there in the state of Washington?
To be honest, I think there's a lot more than people realize. I know when my family moved out west about 30 years ago, we immediately took to trout fishing. And of course, we have some of the best trout fishing in the country here and salmon as well. But bass fishing is really taking off now more than ever as we recruit new anglers and they're looking for new opportunities. We have largemouth bass distributed across the state of Washington in most lakes. Of course, they do really well in shallow, warm, weedy habitats. And then similarly, we have smallmouth bass that are distributed around the state, although they're more likely, you'll find them congregated in larger lakes and reservoirs where there's cooler water and rocky habitat where they do well. But they're pretty much distributed across the state, and there's going to be one near your back door.
So, a lot of people probably are looking at the opportunities here. And what are some of the difficulties for people, Daniel, when they decide to take up fishing for bass? I mean, you and I have talked before. I grew up in the Midwest. You grew up around bass fishing. But there may be people here that just have not done it in a long time, and technology has changed, obviously. What are some of the problems that people run into when they start talking about getting out on the water for bass?
Well, you hit on one of them, and that is all the lures that are available on the market and the techniques. And there's lots of magazine articles, and it can be kind of daunting to get involved in bass fishing. But the truth is bass are still eating worms, plastic worms, and other lures just like they were 40, 50 years ago. And it's not any harder to catch a bass now than it used to be, even though you see a lot more lures on the market to catch bass. One thing that differentiates us from the Midwest and the Southeast is you have a lot more small ponds down there, farm ponds. Almost everyone has a pond that has more than an acre or two of private property, it seems, down there. And so we don't have quite as much shoreline access to a lot of our bass fisheries. That doesn't mean that there isn't any. There's quite a bit in central Washington in places. But in western Washington, a lot of the lakes, you're looking at a single dock or near a ramp where you might access the lake. But I would mention that there's lots of bass clubs you can get involved with, and it's not that hard to find a boater that's willing to take a non-boater out on a lake, which will obviously up your odds of tying into bass.
Right, and there actually are guides that I have talked to in my line of work who do salmon, steelhead, walleye, and they are starting to adopt to and getting more involved, especially on the east side. With learning more about and guiding for bass, because it is, it's quality versus quantity. You're probably going to get a lot more fish, maybe not huge 8-10 pounders, but it's going to be a great outing and something that's memorable for everyone. So a person starts to get ready to go out and fish. What kind of rod and reel would you recommend for a beginner who's starting to take up bass angling?
For a brand new beginner that hasn't casted a whole lot, I always like to recommend the spinning rod or the spin cast rod with the open face. All you need to do is hold on to the line with your index finger and let her rip. It's pretty easy to fling a lure with your index finger releasing the line. much more so than thumbing the spool like you do with a casting reel. I think another mistake people make is they're used to trout fishing, and so they get a medium or a medium light rod. You're definitely going to want a medium to a medium heavy rod for setting the hook on bass and fishing slightly heavier lures like you would. So I like a 6.5 to a 7 foot medium heavy rod is a great starter rod with a small spinning reel spooled up with some 12 or 14 pound test, and you can fish almost every bass lure on that rod. And then as you progress with your skills, you'll definitely be attracted to casting reels because you just have pinpoint accuracy with your thumb on those spools that you don't get with the spin cast.
Yes, and if you have not fished with a rod and reel, especially an open face spinning reel, a lot of times it's good to just take a little weight, tie it on the end there, and kind of cast in your backyard, kind of get ready, get some of the kinks out, so to speak, before you get out on the water.
Definitely.
No, I'm a big drop shotting guy. I love drop shotting, but what are some of the good lures for a beginner to start with?
Well, drop shot is one of my number one go-tos for so many reasons. You can catch literally every species on the drop shot as you're learning to use it. It's easy to rig and easy to fish and easy to set the hook. But aside from the drop shot, for smallmouth, I really like tubes and grubs rigged on just open face jig heads, 1/4 ounce to 1/2 ounce when you're fishing around rocks like on the Columbia River or elsewhere. Those are just really easy baits to bounce off the bottom and catch smallmouth or walleye on. For largemouth, especially as you get into summer and the fish get kind of spooky and they're shallow around vegetation, I love a weightless stick worm. I use the Yamamoto Senko a lot, but every bait company makes a version of a stick worm. And they're salt impregnated, and they have a nice subtle wag to them as they sink. And it's kind of a do-nothing bait. You can cast it near a piece of structure and catch fish that way. The only other thing I'd mention is then you get into Texas rigging, where then you just slide a sliding weight above a creature bait or a worm, and adding some weight allows you to fish it a little deeper and maybe have a little bit more accuracy with your casting. But open face tubes, grubs for smallmouth, and then like a weightless Senko stick worm or a Texas rig creature bait is a great way to get started, I think, catching bass.
Great, Daniel. That's really good info. And we don't want to data dump people here too much, but if you have questions about what you're hearing here, drop shotting, robo worms, etc., don't be afraid to go to your local bait shop, Bass Pro, Cabela's, Outdoor Emporium, whatever it may be, and ask about, I want to get into fishing for bass. Remember, they are there to catch fishermen, not fish. So you're in the right spot when you go into the store. What are some of the tips for bank angling in the state of Washington? You mentioned bank access earlier. What are some of the, things you want to watch out for on that?
I think number one is start to learn your access points. Get out Google Maps, look for city parks, places are public. Of course, WDFW access sites. A lot of lakes in Eastern Washington are surrounded by some DNR or BLM land, which is public, which allows you to walk around the bank. Lake Roosevelt is a great example that's surrounded by a national park, so most of the shoreline is public. So spending some time on maps, and the department right now is working on some resources for shoreline anglers that's going to hopefully help in the future. There's other apps that I use for hunting and fishing, like Onyx, to check property ownership. Onyx is great for doing that. And then, following online fishing reports, there's a ton of information that's disseminated now on Facebook groups like Eastern Washington Fishing or Washington State Fishing. There's tens of thousands of anglers talking about fishing on there all the time. And then lastly, I would just mention what I said before, which is clubs. If you're really interested in bass fishing, these clubs are a community of folks that love to do it, love to share information, and they're not all that serious about tournaments as much as they are passing on great information. So something to look into for sure.
That's great, Daniel. So what are, we just had this once in a century heat wave blow through here, which was a real treat, and helped all the air conditioning installers in this part of the country. What are some of the tips for, dealing with heat when you're fishing for bass during the middle of the summer? We're talking, a lot of people may not know, but a lot of people fish Mardon, Banks Lake, lakes that are maybe a little bit east of here. And so what are some tips you'd give for people on that?
Definitely. So I would say first and foremost is get up early in the morning, and or fish late into the day. But the early morning hours just produce far and away, more bites in the summer. The fish are active in the morning. They're oftentimes shallow. I would also recommend topwater lures, whether that be a frog or a buzz bait or a popper or a walking bait. There's lots of topwater baits, and fish those during the first couple hours of the morning. It's really exciting to see a bass come up and crush a topwater lure during low light conditions. So that's my number one to recommend. But then as you get into the heat of the day, again, fish are kind of spooky, especially if there's not a lot of wind. They will be looking for shade. So anything that provides shade is a great place to start. And then slow your retrieves down, fish weightless Senkos, slow everything down as it gets hot and fish slower. It's going to be a little tougher to get those bites. And lastly, I would say, obviously, if you're fishing for smallmouth, they're going to transition out to deeper water habitat where you may be drop shotting for them out in 20 to 30 feet of water out in the middle of the day, whereas largemouth might be tighter to the cover and much shallower. So there's some species differences there, but those are some good recommendations to go from.
And so, Daniel, what is your, we're talking with Daniel Garrett with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife here about fishing for bass and Bass Week, again, which is July 12th through the 16th. Here in the state of Washington. What is your role with the department right now?
So I'm the lead warm water biologist in Region 1, and I work with one other person, and we cover Regions 1 and 3. There's a few warm water teams scattered around the state, and we're primarily in charge of gathering scientific data on warm water fish communities and working with district biologists to manage warm water resources around the state.
And again, folks, we're talking about Bass Week here in the middle of July. I would definitely invite anyone to go to the DFW website and take a look at what they have planned for Bass Week here. There's a bass photo contest and tons of information, very well put together for people to get out on the water. Anything else you want people to know this coming week or so here as we get into Bass Week?
Only that we'll be putting out more video content, and we just released a video for beginners on how to go buy a few of the rigs I discussed today and how to rig them. It just came up on our YouTube channel, so make sure to check that out as well. Okay, and so if they wanted to access that YouTube channel, Daniel, they just type in Washington Bass and it would come up, or how would they do that? Yeah, just look for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and subscribe to our channel. And I put out content on a semi-annual basis related to fishing how-tos for a lot of different species. So definitely come check us out. All right, again, talking with Daniel Garrett with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We want to thank you very, very much for taking some time out of your busy day to spend with us and help our readers and viewers understand more about what Bass Week is all about. All right, Daniel, anything else you want the folks to know about? No, not at all. Get out there and try bass fishing, and yeah, appreciate the time today. All right, Daniel, thank you very, very much. I'm Jim Clark with Northwest Sportsman and NWSportsmanMag.com. Thanks so much.